There are moments in a man's life that never fully leave him. They don't live in his memory the way ordinary days do. They live somewhere lower than that, somewhere in the body itself, in the way his hands sometimes stop moving without reason, in the way certain smells can pull him backwards 60 years in the space of a single breath. I am 76 years old. My name is Raymond Earl Cutler. And there is a story I have carried inside my chest since I was 13 years old that I have never told anyone completely. Not my wife, not my children, not my pastor, not even God. Not out loud anyway. But I am old now, and old men know something the young have not yet learned. Some things must be spoken before the chance to speak them is gone forever. So tonight, I am going to tell you everything. About the woods, about the plane, about what I found inside it that broke me and saved me at the same time. My mother smelled like lavender soap and pine wood and something warm I could never name but always recognized. That is the first thing I want you to know about her, because everything that happened to me began with losing that smell. She left on a Tuesday morning in April when I was 6 years old. The dogwood trees outside our window were blooming white, and the birds were loud, the way Tennessee birds get loud in spring, like they are arguing with the whole world about something beautiful. I remember waking up and the house felt different before I even opened my eyes. Quieter, in a way, that had nothing to do with sound. I walked to the kitchen, and her coffee cup was on the counter still half full, and her blue robe was on the bathroom hook, and a note was folded under the sugar bowl, and my father was standing at the window with his back to me and his shoulders doing something I had never seen a man's shoulders do before. Shaking, without any sound at all. I never read that note. I never knew what she said or where she went, or why a woman who smelled like lavender and sang quietly while she washed dishes decided one April morning that she could not stay. My father never spoke her name again after that day. Not once. Not in 7 years. And so I learned to carry her in silence the way he did, except I carried her in a cracked photograph I found behind the bathroom mirror when I was 9, tucked between the wall and the frame like she had hidden it there for someone to find later. Her face was turned slightly sideways in the picture, and she was smiling at something outside the frame, and she looked so completely, painfully happy that the first time I saw it, I had to sit down on the bathroom floor and breathe for a while before I could stand back up. I kept that photograph in my front shirt pocket every single day from the moment I found it, right over my heart. Not because I was sentimental, because I was terrified that if I put it somewhere else, I might lose the last real proof that she had existed at all. By the time I was 12, my father had mostly stopped coming home. Not all at once, gradually, the way a fire goes out, not with drama, but with a slow dimming that you keep telling yourself isn't permanent until the room is completely dark and cold, and you finally have to admit it. I ate what I could find. I kept myself clean because my mother had always said that a person who keeps themselves clean is a person who still has dignity, and dignity was the only thing I had left. And then just before my 13th birthday, I woke up to no electricity, no food, no father, and a silence so complete it felt like the house itself had given up. I packed one garbage bag, 2 shirts, 1 pair of socks, a library book I had borrowed and forgotten to return, and the photograph, always the photograph. I walked out the front door on a Wednesday morning with the bag over my shoulder, and I did not look back because I knew if I looked back, I would see something that would destroy whatever small piece of me was still holding together. For several weeks, I survived on the edges of Grover's Mill the way stray animals survived, quietly, invisibly, with a careful attention to not being seen by the wrong people. I slept behind the diner. I found food where I could. I told myself every night that tomorrow I would figure something out. Tomorrow always came and I never figured anything out, but I kept telling myself anyway, because hope, even false hope, is better than nothing when nothing is all you have. It was late October when I wandered into the woods following the creek, not going anywhere in particular, just moving because moving felt less like giving up than standing still. The trees closed around me gradually, The trail disappeared, and by the time the light started fading, I was deep inside forest that had no interest in me whatsoever, surrounded by the particular silence of wilderness at dusk, which is not actually silence at all, but 1,000 small sounds that all seem to be saying the same thing. You do not belong here. And then I saw it through the trees. I stopped walking. I stood completely still because what I was seeing made no sense, and my exhausted brain needed a moment to confirm that it was real. An airplane, large and old and broken, half swallowed by the forest floor, covered in decades of kudzu vine and fallen branches and rust the color of dried blood. The tail section tilted up through the canopy at an angle. One wing had folded completely into the earth. The fuselage had cracked along one side but remained largely intact, curved and ancient and somehow still present after what must have been many years of being slowly forgotten by the world. I walked toward it the way you walk towards something you are not sure is real, slowly, with your hands slightly out in front of you. The cargo door on the side was jammed, partially opened, just wide enough for a thin boy to squeeze through sideways. I pushed the vines back and I went inside. The smell hit me first. Earth and old metal and decades of rain and something else beneath all of that. Something dry and faint and almost sweet that I could not immediately identify. The floor was warped. Leaves had drifted into the corners. The cracked cockpit glass filtered the last of the evening light into something dim and green and underwater. Whatever this plane had carried was long gone. The seat frames were rusted skeletons. But the walls were solid, the roof held. And when I pressed my back against the curved interior wall and felt the stillness of it around me, something in my chest that had been clenched for months slowly, painfully began to let go. I spent that first night curled on the floor with my garbage bag under my head. And I want to tell you what I did before I slept because this is the part I have never told anyone. I took the photograph of my mother out of my shirt pocket. I held it up in the last gray light coming through the cockpit glass. I looked at her face, turned sideways, smiling at something I would never see. And I talked to her, out loud. Alone in a broken airplane in the middle of a Tennessee forest, a 13-year-old homeless boy talked to his mother's photograph like she could hear him. I told her I was okay. I told her I had found a place to sleep. I told her I was sorry for whatever I had done that made her need to leave, because that is what children believe always, without exception, that when a parent leaves, it must be something the child did. That is the cruelest lie abandonment tells, and it tells it so quietly and so consistently that children accept it as simple truth. I pressed the photograph against my chest, and I cried until I had nothing left, and then I slept the deepest sleep I had known in months. I decided to stay, to make it mine, to build something in that hollow, broken place, because building felt like the only honest answer to everything that had been taken from me. Beneath one of the rusted seat frames, I found a metal box sealed with a latch that had frozen with age. I worked it open with a piece of broken bracket over the course of an entire afternoon, and when the lid finally gave way, I sat back and stared at what was inside. Tools wrapped in oilcloth, a hand drill, a rusted but functional saw, several clamps and a small hammer, and beneath the tools, wrapped separately in a piece of canvas that had preserved them against the years, 3 books. A carpentry manual, a Tennessee wildlife guide, and a collection of American poetry, its cover water-stained and warped, its pages soft as cloth from decades of humidity. But it was what was tucked inside the front cover of the poetry book that stopped my breathing entirely. A photograph. A woman, young, smiling, turned slightly sideways, looking at something outside the frame. The same expression, the same angle, the same particular quality of happiness in the eyes. I looked at it for a long time. My hands were shaking. I told myself it was a coincidence. I told myself lots of women smiled that way. I told myself the mind finds patterns when it desperately wants them. But I put that photograph next to my mother's photograph, and I looked at them side by side in the dim green cockpit light. And something in my body went completely still, in the way bodies go still when they know something the mind is not yet ready to accept. I never found out the truth of it, not with certainty. The plane had no identifying papers I could read. The pilot's records, if they ever existed in that wreckage, had long since dissolved into the earth. I was 13 and alone and had no way to investigate anything. But I made a decision that night that I have kept every day of my life since. I decided that she had come through this place. That this broken airplane in these dark Tennessee woods had somehow touched the edges of my mother's life before I was born. I decided it because I needed something to hold on to that was larger than my own suffering. And sometimes, the stories we tell ourselves to survive become the truest things about us. I built that plane into a home over the following months with those rusted tools and the carpentry manual and the particular stubbornness of someone who has nothing left to lose. Shelves along the curved walls, a sleeping platform raised off the damp floor, a table from salvaged wood and flattened metal. I sealed the cracks with mud and moss and packed leaves. I learned to trap and to fish and to read the weather in the color of the morning sky. And every night before I slept, I placed both photographs side by side against the wall above my sleeping platform, my mother and the unknown woman from the poetry book. And I said goodnight to both of them, because loneliness will make a person build a family from whatever materials are available. A retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Adele Granger found me in April when her beagle followed my scent through the woods and refused to come back. She stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at me, and then at the plane, and then at me again, and her eyes filled with something that was not pity. It was older and quieter than pity. It was recognition. The look of someone who understands exactly what it costs a child to survive alone. She sat down on a fallen log outside the cargo door that morning, and she said, "Tell me everything." And I did. I told her about my mother and my father and the empty house and the garbage bag and the photograph and the woods and the plane and the second photograph and the story I had built around them to keep myself alive through the winter. I told her all of it without stopping, and she listened without interrupting. And when I was finished, she reached into her coat pocket and handed me a biscuit wrapped in a cloth napkin. And she said very quietly, "Raymond, your mother would be so proud of what you built here." And that was it. That was the sentence. Those 11 words from a woman I had known for 40 minutes on a spring morning in Tennessee destroyed every wall I had spent 7 months constructing inside myself. I put my face in my hands, and I cried the way I had not cried since the night I arrived. Except this time, someone was sitting 3 feet away from me on a log in the April sunshine, and that made all the difference in the world. Being witnessed in your grief is the thing that finally allows the grief to move. She brought me home. She enrolled me in school. She gave me the back bedroom and 3 meals a day and never once made me feel like charity. A contractor named Harold Greer came to see what I had built in the plane and offered me honest work and taught me everything he knew. I became a carpenter, then a contractor, then a builder of 60 years who constructed homes where children could grow up knowing they were safe and wanted and worth something. I went back to those woods last spring with my grandson Thomas, 12 years old, the same age I was when I found that plane. He walked through it slowly, touching the walls, looking at the shelves still barely visible beneath decades of new growth. He found the metal box, still there, still latched, empty now of everything but rust and memory. He held it in both hands and looked at me. "Dada," he said, "were you scared living here alone?" I looked at my grandson standing in the broken plane where I had once placed 2 photographs on the wall and said goodnight to a mother I had lost and a woman I would never find, where I had built a home from rusted tools and stubborn love and sheer refusal to disappear. Every single night, I told him. But I kept the photographs up on the wall, and somehow that was enough. He nodded, and then he did something I was not prepared for. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of paper and pressed it gently against the curved wall of the fuselage in the spot where my photographs had once hung. I looked at what it was, a drawing he had made himself. Our family, all of us together, his parents, his cousins, his grandmother, me, all of us around a table. "So it's not empty anymore," he said. I had to turn away. I stood at the cargo door looking out at the Tennessee woods in the spring afternoon light, and I breathed slowly, and I thought about a 6-year-old boy waking up to a house that felt different. About a photograph found behind a bathroom mirror. About a second photograph tucked inside a poetry book in a broken airplane. About an old woman with a beagle and a biscuit wrapped in a cloth napkin and 11 words that broke a boy open and let him finally begin to heal. The hardest chapters of a life are not always the ones that break you. Sometimes they're the ones that build you into something you could never have become any other way. If you are in your own dark woods tonight, if you are cold and alone and wondering whether morning is worth waiting for, I want you to hear this from a 76-year-old man who slept on the floor of a broken airplane and talked to his mother's photograph and survived. If this story reached something inside you tonight, please subscribe to the 11th Hour Last Words. Leave a comment and tell me one person you still carry in your heart, no matter how many years have passed. Every like, every share, every comment keeps these stories alive for someone sitting alone tonight who needs to know they are not the only one. We are all out here building in the dark, and none of us should have to build alone. The value in this story reaches beyond entertainment. It speaks to the silent epidemic of childhood abandonment and homelessness in America. It shows that resilience is not the absence of pain, but the decision to keep moving through it. It honors the ordinary heroes, the teachers, the contractors, the neighbors who choose to see a struggling child and respond with dignity rather than pity. It reminds older Americans that the hardest seasons of their lives produce the deepest strength. And it tells every listener, young or old, that the things we build from broken materials and borrowed hope are often the most enduring things we ever create.